I hope I'm not the only one who's thought to myself, hey, what was I like back then? How much have I changed? How much have I made an impact on others? Because today I want to talk about how a small change in yourself can also make an impact on others, even if it's on a small scale. I want you, the audience, to reflect on yourselves back in 2007. What were you like? Who was your friend circle? And what were your interests? Now, some of you may think, wow, I've changed so much, I'm barely recognizable. And to others, that might not be the case. But that's okay, because in the end, there's going to be changes, physically and mentally. Let's start with the physical changes. There are approximately 50 trillion cells in the human body, each constantly replacing themselves at their own rate. And eventually, they'll all be replaced. That process takes about 10 years. So technically, 10 years ago, you're physically not the same person. But what's funny about that is that your brain cells don't actually replace themselves. So mentally, you're still the same person. But that doesn't feel like that, especially considering how, oh wow, I feel like I've changed so much. But that's because we're social animals. We're like clay that never really dry up. We're always going to be molded and influenced by the world around us. We learn from people around us, from those we look up to, and from our environment. So that's a lot of information to sponge up, especially considering how there's so much happening around the world. So in 10 years, it seems pretty obvious that, wow, yeah, of course so much is going to change. But let's put that into perspective of 6 weeks. Dr. Masrick did a study on 31 volunteers in which he made them do regularly 2.5 hours of exercise, give up coffee and alcohol, and 1.5 hours of mental exercises. And what was found? Well, all volunteers improved in focus, mood, self-esteem, and memory. So even simple habit changes can influence you. But maybe for some people, that's not necessary. Maybe you don't want to change your habits. After all, old habits die hard, right? So in that case, maybe it's the small personal sparks that drive you. 30-year-old autistic man by the name of Keaton Argowal was called stupid and humiliated by a gym instructor. So what did he do? He went to his local library, taught himself law, and successfully argued his case. So, with this idea of change, it can happen extremely quickly, and it's almost like metamorphosis. On one hand, it's inevitable, such as your behavior and personality, but on the other hand, there's a conscious decision in your habits and goals. Now, we're constantly moving around and meeting new people. Some of you in the audience and myself are currently in high school, so 10 years from now, we'll be pursuing a career. And in that process, we'll be meeting new people and developing relationships, and having connections is a valuable asset. In the course of 10 years, the average number of people you meet is approximately 10,000. That can include your colleagues, your friends, or that person who told you to tie your shoelaces. But one of those people you meet can have a huge impact on you. They can either be the one giving you support or giving you that extra push. Some may argue otherwise, that having relationships is a sign of weakness and that everyone should be self-sufficient and independent. But as the old saying goes, no man is an island, meaning that no human being thrives when isolated from others. I mean, take a look at one of the most successful people, Steve Jobs. From a young age, he was greatly inspired by his handyman of a father. He enjoyed tinkering with electronics and making cabinets with him. And by the age of 10, Jobs was already deeply involved with electronics. He even befriended the engineers in his neighborhood. So even though he didn't get along with peers at school, he still had the support from his family and neighbors. And that got him to great lengths, because throughout his life, he pursued careers that revolved around his interests. And he met people that guided him in the right path, and eventually becoming Apple's CEO. And when he became Apple's CEO and chairman, Apple products became almost synonymous with innovation. But that took a long time. It took the course of his whole life, not 10 years. However, and that can be compared against the entertainment or the art industry, which can become popular very quickly. But how quickly they become popular is dependent on your connections. I mean, look at Vincent van Gogh. He's considered a modern-day art genius. Yet back in his day, his artworks weren't renowned at all. So 10 years is a lot of time to actually develop in skill and style and in popularity. But it's the people around you who can help you get into the spotlight. We can take a look at Disney as well. This is Princess and the Frog, released in 2009. And this is Moana, released in 2017. Both films were shared the same director, took 5 years of production, and are in the same era of Disney films. And yet, they have very different art styles. But that's because generally now CGI can be considered a cheaper and more effective method of creating animations as opposed to traditionally drawing each frame by hand. So this change in style and development can reflect on society's need for efficiency. And efficiency is a very important term for companies and industries. It's what innovation is focusing on everywhere. I mean, take a look at your smartphones. They have cameras, video recorders, video games, and it's just a computer confined into one device the size of your pocket. And sure, you can say 10 years ago we still had smartphones, but they held less space, they were slower, and generally lower quality. When you look 10 years before that, they weren't confined into one device. They were big and difficult to carry around and use separately. Actually, speaking of smartphones, just last week the iPhone X was announced, and its features are pretty state-of-the-art. 7-year-old me would not have expected an iPhone to have facial recognition, act as a pseudo DSLR camera, or have talking emojis. But it costs $1,000. I don't know about you, but new and futuristic products always seem to be pretty expensive, even when it's not necessary. And that can be taken into account for prosthetics as well, a tool that multitudes of people need. In fact, 2 million people in the United States need prosthetics. They're great for people who feel whose whole world came crashing down, but want to get a second chance. However, prosthetics can be extremely expensive. They can cost between $5,000 to $50,000. And that can probably be due to how they're being developed, to have microprocessors, sensors, and to be lighter. And that's often catered to athletes or just to be more convenient. But not everyone can afford that. So now, 3D printers are being looked at as the future of prosthetics, and they can cost as low as $10. 12-year-old Leon McCarthy lost his fingers from birth due to a lack of blood flow. So what his father did was, he created a prosthetic hand for his son. And it works. His son's able to hold onto his backpack and even ride a bike. And what's most amazing about that is that Leon McCarthy's father learned this all from YouTube. So if just a father can learn how to make a prosthetic hand with 3D printing from YouTube, then imagine what scientists and doctors can do. They can create a cost-effective method to create a tool that millions of people need and thus make it more accessible. Researchers are also looking into developing products to cater to blind people in order to help them see again. In 2007, the Bionic Eye was developed, but it didn't go so great. All that could be seen was mushy black and white figures. And that's okay, because with innovation comes flaws, and the most we can do is actually learn from it. eSight, a pair of glasses developed for a similar purpose, actually worked. The idea stemmed in 2006, and it was released into markets in 2013. And that's just 6 years different from when the Bionic Eye was released, and it actually works. So, can you imagine being born able to see and losing your vision gradually over time? Like with losing a limb, it's pretty hard to adapt to. You'd have to learn Braille and heavily rely on your other senses. So it's great that researchers are coming up with all these pieces of innovation to cater to that. But all these ideas I brought up, they seem very large scale, and that may give the notion that small isn't impactful. But that's simply not true. Think of it this way. Ideas come from inspiration, and inspiration can take any shape or form. Conrad Lewis, the creator of eSight, was actually developing the product to help his blind sisters. And the product would have no reason to exist if a perfectly functioning device already existed. Even the Bionic Eye had good intent, but it just didn't work. Another small idea that has room for big possibilities is bees. Now, some of you in the audience may think that, oh, these insects are sadistic and they like to sting people and cause harm, and others may view them for their crucial role as pollinators. But no one's going to look at that and think, yeah, it can detect cancer in patients. But they do. Honeybees have actually been found to have a very strong sense of smell, and they can actually be trained to detect certain odors. So what has been developed is this glass orb-like tool that has multiple chambers within it. And how it's used is you breathe into it, and if this target odor is detected by the bees, they'll flee into the smaller chamber. But that wasn't developed by just one person. We've needed to have people discover the bees first, and then have the entomologists study them and research them, then have that research and knowledge carried on to another area of study so it can be adapted. So, yeah, knowledge on bees can be used holistically, and that can be applied to other things as well. But if you're worried you have to be a scientist to make big changes, don't worry. And if you're worried if you're too old to make any changes, also don't worry. Because we're constantly moving around and meeting new people. And these people can inspire you, teach you, or challenge you. Even small words of encouragement is enough to go great lengths. I mean, look at kids. If you compliment a kid's drawing, they'll be ecstatic and they'll want to continue it. And eventually they'll grow and practice, and it'll just become much better eventually if they continue it. And in that sense, then maybe you can be the person inspiring others. Sure, not everyone you come by is going to be moved by you or you're going to inspire them. But when the right people do cross paths, great things can be made. And that'll eventually lead into a cycle of inspiration. So, with this idea of 10 years, a community can grow. It can grow in numbers, change in ideologies, create movements in areas, and affect you, the individual. And you, the individual, can also be heavily influenced by 10 years. You can uptake a new skill, you can meet new people, have a life-changing moment, use newly developed products to cope with those changes, and impact those around you. But in the end, it depends on you, the individual, what you want to do and how you want to do it. Thank you.